sigh. Where did we work on particles? No. Was this particles? This was particles. Ugh. Wow, that's great. Wow.
Say the last for best. So in certain areas, this is a in creating the particle effects. Obviously, if we had all clouds basically emitted and sent as a projectile downwards at a speed we set, and it becomes rain. Assigned it something that we want, and it's definitely a particle effect.
Okay.
Next thing we're going to do is right here, the rendering right now is opaque. So if we look down here at this preview, that's not going to make a really good particle effect because we're not getting any translucency from.
Where did I put all my stuff? Here it is. That should be right.
The sprite whatsoever. So what I can do is I can come in here and change from opaque to fade, and it'll change it into a particle effect. Now, likewise, I can come in here and I can change it to, and fade will keep it at the same level. Now, particle effects are usually, in this case smoke, particle effects usually offset the fact that they are translucent and dark by adding a color or a light emission within them to give them some value. So in this case, if we come down and we pick additive, so we're going through the rendering mode. So additive is going to give it just a little bit of light, so we're going to be able to see it. Now they have the opposite, subtractive, which makes things darker. So if we were making something that was going to suck light from an area, a particle effect,
just like Photoshop. Okay. Easy enough. But how do I change the color? That's not possible, is it? No, it should be possible in the material thing. I don't know what I'm doing.
we would use subtractive. But in this case, we want to introduce, because obviously when the smoke comes up, it's catching light from the fire. It has a little bit more illumination than that stuff around it. Because if we just leave it at fade, it will stay really, really dark unless we associate a light of some kind with the particle effect all the time. We don't want to do that. So I'm going to switch it back to additive, which is sort of the default for almost all particles, almost all like mundane particles. You want to make sure that you've got additive set and that it's set to the particle standard surface shader. All right, so now we've got the raw material for our particle. Now we need to plug it into the particle editor in order to actually do some really, really cool stuff with it. So to get to the particle editor is pretty easy. It's the same way we add everything else in the scene. We want to go to Game Object, and then we want to go to Effects, and we want to go to Particle System. So once we add Particle System, it's going to...
Yeah, it's really that easy. Sure. Of course it is. It's never that easy. Ugh. Okay. Fine. idea. Why can't I see it? Oh, right. Oops. Still can't see it. It is definitely in front of that. Okay. Unity just drives me absolutely crazy. I should have no problem seeing it, but I can't. Come on. They're so hard to click on. Okay. Nothing? Okay. You know, I really don't understand that. This makes absolutely no sense. Yeah, I know what it is now. I hate Unity so much. Oh great, it's not working again? Oops. No, why does it not work? This makes zero sense. Why does it disappear if I move it away? Nothing. Okay. Is my camera backwards? Is that the problem? No, that's not the problem. So how do I change stuff?
Going to drop a particle system in there, a default particle system, and this is what they look like. This is what a default particle system looks like. Now, a particle system, just like everything else we've added in here, is made up of two different rule sets because we've got the 2D, 3D thing going on. So we're going to add a 2D sprite that's in a material to it, so it's going to still adhere to the rendering layer or the sorting layer, but it's also going to adhere to the position within the game level in 3D space as to where it emits from or what it does. So in this case, let's assume that we've got one of these things that we want to have an exhaust coming out of. So if I select this guy, and luckily in the materials, I created a cool exhaust material for it. So we've got a little exhaust thing there. So let's assume that that's going to be where we want our particle to emit from. We want the smoke to come out of this nifty exhaust thing. So let's go grab our particle effect, and let's go ahead and move it over by that area at least. So we've got that over there. Now let's go ahead and make sure that it always draws where it needs to be or where we want it to be. So the first thing we want to do is when we click on it, you notice we get the particle system in the inspector. This has all of the cool stuff we can do with this particle, and it is a lot. Like we'll scratch the surface of this, but you could get lost. I've gotten lost for hours and hours and hours in the particle system. It is so cool. But anyway, back on task, focus. Let's get it drawing correctly. So let's go down here. We're in the inspector. We've got the particle selected. So down here, we want to go all the way to the bottom to the renderer. I'm going to expand the renderer. And again, this has a lot of variables in here, but the one we want to focus on first is going to be the sorting layer down here. So you'll notice this is the exact same sorting layer structure as all of the 2D assets have to adhere to. So in this case, we've got it set to default. So we want to bring this thing to some other thing that we know is going to draw in front of everything but the player. So if I bring this thing up to foreground, now all of a sudden you'll notice all of those sprites are drawing in front of everything now, like they should, which is great. Now that's half the battle. So we want to make sure in 3D space is where we want it to be as well. So I'm going to switch out of 2D space. And right now it's sort of in this limbo out there. So I'm going to move it back just a little bit. So it's a little bit closer to where we've got our exhaust pipe coming from. A lot of folks will actually make sure that they get these emitters right where they need to be to have the effect happen. We may tune that in later, but for now we've got it in a pretty good place. So we know it's drawing in front of everything that's got the 3D materials on it. And we know that it's sorting correctly. So let's switch back to 2D. Now we want to go ahead and the first thing we want to do is we want to change from the default like little cotton ball looking sprite particle we've got to our smoke particle effect. So we've got our material right there. So we'll have a little bit of a better look and feel for this than we were with just the really, really bright cottony feel for that. Now we could go into the and have a whole mission structure on how to create particle effects. But we don't have time. So I highly recommend you take a look at the ones that I give you, and then there's resources out there that will let you go out and take a look at how to create them. They're almost always PNGs. They use translucency, basically just like a cloud or anything else that you've got on there, but it translates it into a particle. So we won't get too much into that, but here we've got our smoke particle effect. Now, there's some of the things that are going on with it right now that we need to change, though. So the first thing is they're all facing the same direction, and they're spewing out in like every place you can imagine. So we want to be able to have a little bit more control over them than we do now. So to do that, we're going to jump up into some of the variables up here that will let us control them a little bit better. Now let's take a look at go all the way to the top of the particle system first, because there's some stuff we need to check to make sure that our particles work correctly, whether they're finished or not, that they just work the way that they're supposed to. Now the first one that's really important is up here. You want to make sure, and it is by default, but make sure looping is checked. So if you don't press looping, the particle is going to play once and then stop. So unless you have another script or something that's going to call it again, you'll have smoke that comes out and then it's just done. It's over and it doesn't come back. It just finishes. It plays one emitter cycle and then it's finished. We want it to loop because we want the smoke to just keep coming out of this thing. Like they never stop producing whatever it is that's producing the exhaust smoke from this thing. So the next thing we want to do is right beneath it, there's a little box that's never checked, but you want to, called pre-warm. So I'm going to show what this does. So if I don't check pre-warm and I press this button, let me move the camera up there real quick, or the player actually. Our player wants to be up there, so let's go ahead and move our player. Grab our little player and move them up near that area. There we go. So now if we pop in there, so you notice it took a second for the smoke to start going. So like it's like when I enter the field of view of the emitter, then it starts. So this doesn't really feel like it's a real particle emitter because there's not a lot of smoke particles or exhausts that start as soon as you look at them or get in proximity of them. They're usually going on and on before you even get there. So to offset that, they have this pre-warm button, which means if we click the particle system and we check pre-warm, this, as it's getting ready to play the scene, it's already generating the particle effect itself. So when the game starts playing, the particle effects are already working. So in that case, let's take a look. So we click that thing and it's like right off the bat, they're already going. So they're already emitting before we even get into the game. Otherwise, we have to wait until we enter within proximity of them, with our visual camera. Our camera has to touch them and then they start. So 99 out of 100 times, you're going to want to select pre-warm because you definitely want to make sure that particle is going before you get there. Otherwise, you'll have a fire that starts on a torch, the second you look at it, or you'll have a light that comes on when you look at it, which might be kind of cool. I mean, if you had like a situation where you were in this long hallway and it was like one of those space stations, and then when you got in the proximity of the area, then the light would come on and it would go off when you left it. You could totally do that with particles by not selecting pre-warm. Now, the next part of it is basically the lifetime and the speed for it starting. Now, if it ever goes off and the particle is selected, you'll notice it gives you this little console control panel down here that wasn't there before. So this is the effect editor. So I can click play again, or I can click restart, and it'll restart the emitter from the beginning. Again, this loops, so like it'll start from wherever it starts. Like if you hit that again, you can't tell that much with smoke, but if it's some other effect where like the beginning needs to be debugged, you might want to restart it till you get that correct. In this case, we'll just hit play or pause. You notice it's got the playback time, etc. So think of this as like a little remote control for our particle effect. Now, once it's going, we can start to tune it. So if we come over here and we start to look at this thing, so the lifetime, so if we increase the lifetime, let me zoom out a little bit. So if we increase the lifetime, that particle effect is going to be around for longer and longer and longer, as long as we set the lifetime to be. So in this case, if we know that the camera is only coming up to there, this would probably be not a really good use of the particle system. So if we bring it down, though, now we've got it ending at the top. We can always have it go a little bit beyond it, but still, we don't need to have it go all the way off with the default 5. Now, the next thing is the speed. So do we want this thing to be slow or do we want this thing to be faster? So if I make it faster, obviously really, really fast is going to be like rain. But you'll notice a funny thing happens because by increasing the speed, I'm also increasing the length of it. So it's automatically upping the lifespan based on the speed. So again, there's sort of a delicate balance between these two. Now, if I slow it down, you'll notice it's slow, having all the really cool stuff hidden behind really, really, really tiny. It's usually a little bit smaller at the bottom, and then it gets bigger at the top. Now, they have some preset curves down here where you can just sort of pick to start out with. But again, they won't always be what you want. They won't get you in the ballpark of where you want to be. So what you can do to offset that is if we say, so start size is going to be 2 or 1.5. I guess it's 20. That's really big. 2. Let's go ahead and reverse that. So now we've got the larger smoke particles down there, smaller up there. So we can go ahead and change that. If we want them to be kind of small there, and want them to be really big when they get away, we can do that. It has Bezier handles on it, so we can, again, make it a lot more organic in the shift. So again, we're trying to get it to look like smoke. So you can use these preset curves to get in the ballpark, but then you can fine-tune it by hand in the curve editor, and you can use the Bezier curves to sort of make it a little bit more organic. And I know that this is a lot of stuff, but it's just an intro to the editor. So don't panic and be like, how am I ever going to do this stuff? So again, you want to tackle it one particle effect at a time. You want to identify the effect, and then start to figure out how can I make this effect work. Now, again, we can come in here, and if we want to, we would end up with, this is the lifetime down here. So if we bring 3, change the size over time like this. Let's start there. So simulation space. So then we've got the play on awake. So this one's going to be important too. So make sure this is checked. It is by default, but this means that, that once you press play or once the player goes on there, that this thing is already. This is the biggest thing that will kill your performance in a heartbeat is cranking up that max particles in there, because all of a sudden you will have so many little over time. You can play with these, and again, you're looking of the effect now. cone is the default, which is going to be like the emitter is coming from here, and it's basically what we can do is we can then scale that box out, so it scales the emitters and it scales the shape itself. We can also come in here and we can scale just the box. So we know X is the horizontal scale. So if we've got it set to box,